Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Mioch and you are watching Context. The second round of direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks held in Istanbul on Monday resulted in an agreement of the two sides to swap bodies of 6,000 killed soldiers each and to exchange all sick and heavily wounded prisoners of war, as well as those aged under 25. A ceasefire, however, remains elusive. Russia presented its demands for ending the war, including Ukrainian withdrawal from territories Moscow illegally annexed and abandonment of its NATO bid, among other provisions. The Ukrainian side said it will review the Russian document and suggested that a new round of negotiations could happen between June 20th and 30th. On the eve of the talks, following a night of a record number of drone strikes endured, Ukraine launched the Spiderweb operation. Planned for more than a year, it was aimed at 5 air bases deep inside Russia. In the immediate aftermath, Kyiv claimed they had destroyed or damaged a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet with drones. Just today, the Ukrainians said they successfully hit the Kerch Bridge, connecting Russia to Crimea with underwater explosives. On the latest surrounding the war and the peace negotiations, we're talking with political analyst Diogo Castro Silva, coming to us from Sao Paulo. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the Spiderweb operation. It took Russia by surprise, with some hailing it as a PR victory, proving that Ukraine is still in the game. As to the results of the operation, the numbers are contested, but what do you make of such a bold move to launch drones from within Russia, hitting bases as far as in the Arctic, Siberia and the Far East, just ahead of another round of talks?
Well, I think it was a sign. People compare it as people have compared it with Pearl Harbor. I don't think the comparison is really that one for many reasons. I think it's more comparable to what Israel did to the Hezbollah with the pager detonations that it did that decapitated the Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon. So it's a show both of course, of PR, showing that Ukraine can hit the strategic capacity of Russia, at the same time trying to diminish the capacity of Russia to carry strikes into Ukraine, because the bombers that were targeted were the ones that are being used to launch missiles over Ukraine. So I think it had both a military objective and a political objective that was very clear, to show that Ukraine, far from surrender, is willing to escalate the war, to show the costs that Russia will incur if it pursues the war. And this is, I think, the most important point Ukraine is trying to show as a way to compel Russia to come as a reasonable party to any talks that will occur or were going to occur in the day after the Spiderweb operation.
How much of an incentive would you say that the Spiderweb operation and even today's attack on the Kerch Bridge could prove to be, not only for Ukraine's European allies to continue supporting Kyiv, but also for Washington? If what the Ukrainians are saying is true and the operation was being planned for over a year, that would mean it was already in the works at the time of the Oval Office showdown, when US President Donald Trump attacked Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he has no cards.
Well, that point you raise is an interesting one, because we have to go back even to the Biden administration. One of the reasons Biden administration were sending weapons to Ukraine, of course, was to help Ukraine defend itself, but it was also to have some kind of veto over operations that would affect the strategic balance between the US and Russia. Because the biggest concern of the Biden administration was always a potential of escalation of the conflict into a conflict between United States and Russia. So the aid that was supplied to Ukraine had also this objective. So one of the reasons, because if you take at face value the comment of Zelensky that the operation is being prepared for a year and a half, this goes back even to the Biden administration. So the reason there was never a warning to the US administration, even at the Biden period, was to keep this card as a potential card. Now, I would guess that if the Trump administration had continued to provide aid to Ukraine and support Ukraine in a decisive way, then at certain point prior to the operation, I believe the Ukrainians would demand at least the acquiescence of, not the opposition of Washington. But once Washington kind of left Ukraine on its own, Trump administration has been far more aligned with Russia than with Ukraine in many of these issues. So it gave freedom to Ukraine to act. And Ukraine is also showing to Washington that contrary to what Trump said at the White House, that Zelensky has no cards, well, Zelensky is trying to show in Ukraine that it has a few cards to play. It can influence the conflict. And that was also a political message aimed mainly at Washington to show that Ukraine will not stay put and just let itself being bombed and attacked without any response.
Let's turn to the Russia-Ukraine direct peace talks. Monday's round lasted roughly an hour. Besides the swap of bodies and an agreement to exchange heavily wounded and youngest soldiers, there were no advances made towards a ceasefire. Russia came out with its demands that Ukraine and its allies have rejected even before. What do you expect to happen here before the suggested third round of talks in the last third of June?
I expect, to be honest, nothing. I don't think Russia is interested in negotiating anything. I think on the mind of Putin, Putin believes he can win. And he can win, one on the military side, and also what he sees as the structural forces that are undermining Western democracy, that over time it will play in his favor. That is his mind. I'm not saying, I don't think it's a good bet for him, because in the meantime Russia is losing men, materiel, the strategic capacity, but I think that is his bet. So he's not interested, he's just playing a game of having a face-saving excuse to continue operations if the talks won't bear any success, which they won't, because Russian demands continue to be Ukraine's capitulation. And so there is no basis for any agreement. We must not forget as well that since the beginning of Putin regime, the question of Ukraine has always been on the forefront of the regime, first trying to have a friendly pro-Russian leader in many elections, even poisoning an ex-president of Ukraine. So always first by political means, then after Yanukovych went, with the annexation of Crimea and parts of the Donbass, and now outright war, because the objective has always been the submission of Ukraine, at best as a kind of Belarus, or at worst as pure annexation. The regime does not view Ukraine as a legitimate country, and that objective has not changed. So there is nothing, it's like asking Hitler what was the objective in terms of the Barbarossa operation when he invaded the Soviet Union at the time. What was he willing to negotiate? Well, nothing, because he wanted to destroy the Soviet Union at that time. So this is the same kind of war. So the only way to have some kind of peace agreement is, one, a change of regime in Moscow, or that the costs become so high in the battlefield and political, and even the Putin's regime is survival is at stake, that he's compelled at least to have even a temporary agreement on this front. And these two things are not happening yet, so I don't expect anything to happen in any further rounds of negotiations in this format.
Well, there was a very specific detail yesterday. The Ukrainians presented a list with the names of 400 children they say Russia abducted, and according to Kyiv, Moscow agreed to work on the return of 10 children. What kind of a picture would you say this paints of the entire negotiating process?
Well, I think it's a very obvious example that for Russia, this is a for show process. First of all, the abduction of even one child, never talk about 400, is a form of annihilation of an identity of a people. And this is being pursued as state policy. So this tells you a lot about how the current Russia regime sees Ukraine, sees these peace talks, so-called peace talks. So unfortunately, I think we will see an escalation of the war in Russia. I think that is inevitable. Ukraine will strike other objectives in Russia, will do asymmetrical warfare in Russia, and I think there is a great danger for attacks in Europe by Russia, increasing the threshold of hybrid warfare that they have been pursuing for the last few years. So I do think, contrary, we are not going for peace talks, we are going to see an escalation of the war.
Obviously, Kyiv and its allies are pushing for a ceasefire. Russia claims it's looking for a long-term settlement. I know you've said you don't expect nothing from this format, but what would it take in your mind to come to a truce? What kind of a format? Or what measures?
I mean, I see, independent of the format, I don't think Putin will ever meet Zelensky unless it's compelled by the situation in the battlefield, because for him, Zelensky is an illegitimate leader, and what he wants is to toxify politics in Ukraine in order to turn this country unmanageable politically. So the only way I see, independent of the format, if you have Putin, if you have Zelensky, or if you have below at the ministerial level, is that the regime sees its survival at stake in Russia, so that the continuation of the war brings so many costs that outweighs any benefits, and they are compelled to do something for regime survival purposes. Otherwise, this is kabuki, this is just theater to show, to have a face-saving exit, that they will continue the war because there is no long-time peace settlement, which in fact is long-term peace settlement, which in fact continues to be total capitulation of Ukraine. So there is no middle ground to aim when the other party is demanding total capitulation. So that's why I see that the war will escalate, because I don't see any capacity to lower the temperature at this stage. I see that both parties will engage furthermore in an all-out war to compel the other to in a way to come to the table in what are totally incompatible demands.
Well, Diogo, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and opinions.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That's all we had for you in this edition of Context. Stay tuned to A News.